Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So this month we're going to be doing foundation paper piece block, a star block. I thought it would be fun. You could turn it into a pillow or make several blocks and make a table runner. You could do a whole quilt. I'm planning on actually doing a whole quilt. I think this would be really pretty in a whole quilt. This is the block we're making, called the Simple Stars block. Isn't that just gorgeous? But I'm going to be going over tools, a few tips and tricks. Now, I'm completely self-taught on foundation paper piecing. I am absolutely no expert. So the quilting police, please don't come at me. There is more than one way to do something to get the same results. Matter of fact, this is probably my fourth foundation paper piecing quilt. This is Judy Niemeyer pattern called Prismatic Star, and this is the fourth or fifth one of hers that I've done. Completely self-taught, but I know for me, when I was learning how to, or wanting to learn how, I was researching and looking things up, and it just was very minimal information on this. It doesn't have to be expensive to get started. You don't need fancy tools and notions to do it. So yeah, so that's what this video is about. So I will show you guys step by step how to make this star. I will leave a link in the description with the pattern piece for you to print out. You'll need to print out 4 for each block that you decide to make. I go over cutting instructions. If you are uncomfortable with the way that I do the cutting, you can definitely cut just blocks, squares and rectangles, just to cover your pattern piece, if that's easier for you. And so yeah, so I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you at the end. Sorry about all the mess that you're going to see back there, but let's talk about the tools that you're going to need. So you just need your standard rotary cutter, a ruler. You do not have to have the specialty at a quarter ruler. You can do this with a regular ruler, as long as you've got the 1/4 inch seam line on there. If you find later on that you want to do more paper piecing, I would definitely recommend getting the at a quarter, and it is just got a lip on it on the inside here, so that when you butt it up against your fabric, you get a perfect 1/4 inch seam when you're trimming your fabric down. But it's not necessary. A fabric glue pen, or like an Elmer's glue stick. Oh, let's see, I think I've got that. This is an Elmer's glue stick. These are not needed, not necessary, but they are pretty handy. This is just got fabric glue in it. They just kind of help a little bit, but you don't have to have those. And then the only other thing that I would say you absolutely do need is something to be able to fold your paper against. This is a piece of plastic that came off of the front of a spiral notebook. I just trimmed it square, or thick cardstock might work, or even a thick envelope. Just something that you can fold your fabric back to get a good straight line when you're folding your pieces back. So let's talk about your pattern. So for this block, we're going to use this pattern here, and you will need 4 of these to make your star. We need 4 units, so you will print 4 of these off. I will have a link down in the description for you to get this particular pattern. The pattern's going to come, and it's going to have a 1 inch square here, and this is for you to measure and make sure that when you print it, this square still measures 1 inch. If it does not, you may need to adjust your printer settings a little bit. I just did mine on 100%, and it came out to 1 inch square. So you will need 4 of these for each block. Now, let's go ahead and trim this one out. I trim a little bit extra around here. Let me explain how this pattern works. So this solid line all the way around the edge is going to be a seam line. This dashed line is for our seam allowance. So when we get our blocks sewn together, they will be sewn right here on that dark line. Not all patterns come this way. If they do not show you the seam allowance, you need to allow for the seam allowance. This particular pattern did have that on there. Now I just trim mine, kind of rough trim it out. Let me get some scissors. And I leave a little extra, so I'm not going to cut right on that dotted line. I'm just going to leave myself a little extra here. And this way, it gives me some extra room, because we are going to trim this down once we're finished. So, just like that. All right, and so that's our unit. Now, paper piecing is, foundation paper piecing anyway, is kind of like sewing or painting by numbers. It's sew by numbers. This is where our first piece is going to go. Here is our second piece. So we're going to sew on that line between 1 and 2. Then we will add our third piece and we will sew on this line. Then our fourth piece, we will sew on this line, then our fifth piece, and sew on that line right there. That is how it's going to work on here. So if you are unsure about your fabric placement, one good thing you can do, especially with a block like this, it's just a 4-patch, is you can kind of put these together in the pattern of your star, the way your star is going to be, and get an idea of where your fabrics are going to go. So these outside pieces, these big chunks here, are all going to be background. These are going to be the main print or one print, and then you have these little accent pieces. All right, so that also we can count and see how much fabric we need. So we know we need 4 of fabric 1. We're going to need 4 of fabric 2, 4 of fabric 3, and so on. Now, because of the way these units are set up, we have 2 mirrored pieces. These are the same exact size, but they're mirrored to go opposite directions. Same thing on our accent fabric. So when you're cutting your fabric, you need to keep that in mind, whether you need it all right side up or whether you can place it, you know, wrong sides together. That way you get the mirrored pieces. This pattern did not tell me what sizes I needed to cut for my pattern pieces. Some patterns will give you measurements. If you're not sure, if you're a real beginner and you're not sure about doing angles, I'm going to show you how to cut these, and so you know which side to sew on and what have you. You can just cut big rectangles out. Just make sure that they cover the entire pattern piece and leave a little extra. One thing about foundation paper piecing is that there is a lot more waste. So if you don't like a lot of waste, you know, foundation paper piecing may not be for you, but a lot of the pattern writers write their patterns really well and minimize the waste. And I'm going to show you what I do to minimize any waste. So I printed off one of these pieces here. And to get my pattern, my fabric, what size I need, I'm going to cut each one of these pieces out and use that as a template so I know what size my fabric is. But before I do that, I'm going to mark my sew lines so that when I have my pieces cut, I know which side I need to put on next, so that when I flip it over, it's going to fit on each one of these pattern pieces, and I will show you what that looks like. But we go from 1 to 2. We know we're going to sew on this line, so right up here I'm going to write sew line right across there. So I know that when I put this fabric onto here, I need to put that edge of the fabric on this one to sew it down. Same thing over here on 3. This is my sew line. All right, and then 4, this is my sew line. And then on 5, this is my sew line, or sew side, whatever makes sense to you. So that's how I have it. So then I'm just going to take a ruler and cut all of these pieces out exactly like they are on the lines. On some of these patterns, it's going to be a little difficult to do if you've got a lot of things crossing over, so you'll just have to allow for that when you're cutting out your fabric to make sure that you have enough. So we'll just go up there. I'm just going to cut this piece. And like I said, I'm just using this as for my template, and this is just going to help me to not have so much waste. You could use scissors for this. I'm just using a rotary cutter. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay. Now, let's see what we got here. Okay, so I know I can cut this one. So that's, and this, since it's already numbered, I already know that this is fabric number 5. So that's very handy. Here's my number 2. Number 4, and just kind of go in order until you get them where you need them. And then number 1. So now I know what my pieces, my fabric pieces should look like. So it'd be pretty simple to cut these out. Let's get them started and get them cut out. Okay, so according to my unit, piece number 1 is this piece here, and I want the gray right there. I need 4 of these. They're not mirrored. It's not going to matter which way my fabric is going, so I've got 4 layers right here of fabric. I'm just going to lay this on here and use my ruler, and I'm going to leave myself about a 1/2 inch on every single side when I cut this out. So let's see here. I could have folded this up and made it a little smaller. This here also is where your fabric glue might come in handy, where you can just put a little piece on it so that it stays put while you're trimming. So about a 1/2 inch. This is going to give me plenty of room to make sure that it fits on my piece on my pattern. Okay, so I've got 4 of those, and if we double check it, we'll just make double sure. Yep, it's going to cover it perfectly on both ends, go over both corners, up and get into my seam allowances. Awesome. Okay, so there's piece number 4. Now for my accent fabrics, I'm using a turquoise color here. And on this particular pattern, since 2 and 3 are the same size, you could just cut 8 if you wanted to. What I'm going to do is I need mirrored, I need all the pieces on 2 and 3 to be right side up because I'm not mirroring anything. So I'm just going to go through here and make sure they're all right side up. Like that. Okay. And then I've got, there's 3 and here's 2. I'm going to put a little bit of fabric glue on that and just stick it right there. And I'll go ahead and do number 3 and stick it down there. And again, about a 1/2 inch on each side. Oh, I didn't get that cut all the way through. I'll put those back in my scrap. I had this stuff in my scrap, so. And it, like, you know, that's a good thing about foundation paper piecing. It doesn't have to be extremely accurate because we are going to be trimming all of this down as we go. You just want to make sure you have enough to cover your pattern. That's the main thing. All right, so now when I pick these up, I know that this is the sew side that I need to, this is the side I need to make sure I have a seam allowance on, which it'll make more sense when we get into stitching those up. And then for my background, I've got this. So I've got this color, so I'm going to do the same thing on the background pieces and get those cut out. I also forgot to mention, I'm using regular copy paper for this pattern. You can buy newsprint, what they call newsprint, and some specialty paper made specifically for foundation paper piecing. But I have found copy paper to work just as good, and I actually like it better because I can see my lines on the back of here. Now, if you can't see your lines on your paper, all the experts, or what I found, recommend going through and folding on all of your sew lines. You do not have to do the outside line, just the sew line, so that when you are working from the back side, you will be able to see where your fabric needs to go. Okay, so now you can see the creases, so we can see exactly where our fabric needs to go. Now, the important thing to note when doing foundation paper piecing is you are essentially sewing upside down. We're used to putting fabrics right side together, piecing it through, which we're still doing. However, it's going to be all done back here on the back of the pattern. We're going to be sewing on this side because this is where our sew lines are. So it's upside down from what we are used to. Now, another absolute rule when starting your very first unit on paper piecing, the very first fabric will always go right side up. When you flip your pattern over to the back side, your fabric will go right side up. This was very confusing for me for the longest time, and I don't know why, but it was. So I know I've got my fabric there. I'm just going to make sure I'm covering everything. Okay, and it is. And so again, I'm going to use my fabric glue and just put a little dash on. Got a little bit too much right there. And then I'm going to lay my fabric down. Okay, so I've got my very first piece on. Now, we're going to trim the seam allowance on this. So this is our 1 to 2. Here's our sew line. So we're going to fold the paper back. And we need to make a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance right here. And like I said, I do have the add a quarter ruler, but I'll show you that you can use a regular ruler. Just, you want to go a 1/4 of an inch past your folded paper and trim. Okay, so now we've got a seam allowance. Now what I like to do is open my pattern back up, place it right sides down, and find fabric number 2. And this is where the sew line comes in, because now we know where we need to sew it on. So my fabric number 2 is going to go right here. All right, so I know, oops, I guess I could have just pulled one off of the bottom there on the right side. So this long edge was my sew line according to my pattern piece. Now this fabric is going to go right side down on to our first fabric. And since this is a sew line, now I know it goes along this 1/4 inch seam allowance right here. I'm going to bring it down and make sure that it's covering all of my piece. And if you're not sure, you can just kind of put your fingers on the 1/4 inch deal there, roll it back, make sure it covers, and if it does, you're good to go. Then what I'm going to do is take a little fabric glue, just peel this back, and right in the seam allowance, just put a couple little dots. Now that is going to hold my fabric while I take it over to the machine to stitch it down. Since we're doing 4 units and they're all the same, I'm going to prep all of these before I start sewing. So I'll do one more with you so that you can see. And since, like I said, I'm not folding creases in this one because I can see my pieces really well. So I'll put a little fabric glue, take fabric number 1 right side up, and just put it down on there. All right, and then here's my fabric number 2. I'm going to take my little card folder, whatever you want to call it, fold this back. And this is where the add a quarter ruler works really well, because now I can just butt that up right against the edge of my fabric, make a little trim. Now I have a perfect 1/4 of an inch seam. Flip this back over. Here's fabric number 2. I know this is the sew side, and this is going to go right sides together. And just put it down like that. Take a little bit of fabric glue, make a dot. It doesn't take very much, and it's all going to be in your seam allowance, and most of this glue washes out. So, all right, so I've got my second piece ready to go. So I'll finish these other 2, and then we'll get started sewing. Okay, so I've got all 4 of my units done. I've got the fabric number 2 on. So what I'm going to do is flip this over. Make double sure all your fabrics are flat, nothing gets turned under, otherwise you're gonna have to pick it out. Turn your stitch length down to about a 1.5. I think that's about, yeah, 1.5. That will help perforate this paper and make it easier to pick out. If you have to pick stitches out, though, it can kind of be yucky. So let's do this right the first time. All right. So we're going to sew directly on this line, and we're going to start back from the line a little and end outside of the line a little. This is just because when your stitches cross, this will keep them from pulling out when you're ripping your paper out. It will help a whole lot. So you could back stitch if you wanted to. I don't. I'm just going to start back behind it and go straight down the line here. Right past the line, and you can see that I went past it and started past it. You can turn it over to make double sure that you've got your 1/4 inch seam. And we're just going to do all 4 pieces like this and do them all at one time. This makes it just easy peasy. Kind of chain piecing, but not really, I guess. But if you just do all these units at once, it takes a lot less time than doing it 1 unit at a time. make sure your fabric is laying flat. And I've got a thread right there that wants to be obnoxious. Yep. I don't know what that thing was doing, but okay, let's try it one more time here. Alright, line number 2, I'm going to make sure all my fabric is flat. An open-toed foot is very helpful if you're doing foundation paper piecing, so you can see exactly where you're driving your needle. Okay, let's get these pressed and trimmed. For accuracy reasons, I would recommend pressing with an iron after each time you stitch. You could finger press it, but if there's a little bit of a lip or the fabric is moved over and you don't realize there's a little extra fold there, when you go to put your next piece on, it's going to make your block not quite as accurate as you want it. So I just roll it back. You can iron on the paper, just don't use any steam, and you should be good to go. And I've got a stray thread right there. There we go. But just pressing it just will help ensure accuracy. Okay, so we've got our fabric 3, because that's one we're fixing to attach right in here. So we've got everything pressed, so we need to fold on this line right here. So we're going to fold right there. Use your ruler and make a 1/4 inch seam by trimming that. Alright, flip your pattern back over. We know that this long edge is the sew line. Our fabric is going to go right sides together. And it's coming past. Here is the points on that. I've got plenty of extra. Then I'm going to use my little fabric pen, fabric glue pen. Put a little dot here and a little dot there. Okay, that piece is ready to sew. So I'm going to get all these other 3 done the same way. Okay, so now we're going to sew, we did 1 to 2. Now we're going to sew on piece 3, and again, just stitch right on that line, starting back behind it a little. And zip all the way down and past the edge of the pattern piece. Okay, and I'm going to do all these other 3 and get those done. Okay, and again, we're going to press with the iron. And then I've got the other 3 pressed. We're going to come in here and trim all of these and add our next fabric piece. Okay, so our next piece is number 4. So we need to go on the number 4 line where we're going to next stitch, our next stitching line. Fold the paper back. And if you have a little stitches that where you've crossed over there, just kind of gently rip them out of the paper. Trim your seam allowance. Open your pattern, flip it over, and we need number 4. And we know, because we marked our sew line on our pattern piece, that this long edge is going to go right here. Because this is a triangle and it's taller at the top than it is here, be sure your taller part of your fabric goes right here so that when you roll that back, you get a good fit. All right, little fabric glue. Just like that. This one is ready to sew. Okay, so we're going to stitch on line 4. If you have any stray threads, just grab them while you're here. Come on down past the line. Okay, we're going to press this one back on all 4 pieces. Okay, so we're fixing to add number 5 piece, which is our last piece. So we're going to fold this back and just repeat the process. You can see all these little trimmings. There's a little bit of extra waste with this, but you can't beat the results that you get once it's finished. So I know my long side. Okay, so we'll put a little glue right there and line that back up. Okay. Okay, we're stitching on our last line. Line 5. Okay, let's get this pressed. All right, so now is a good time to make sure that you got everything covered. I'm within the seam allowance on that. It looks close, but I'm within the seam allowance, so just make sure that everything is covered the way that you want it to be. Give it a really good press, and then we're going to trim these up. Okay, so we're not going to trim on these solid lines here. We want to trim on the dash line. We want 1/4 of an inch seam away from our sew line, and these dash lines just give us markings to be able to trim, so just keep that in mind. Don't do like I just did. I just trimmed a whole unit on video and trimmed the wrong thing. If you trim this solid line, you're going to cut your points and stuff off, so trim on the dash line or 1/4 inch away from that solid line. I'm gonna have to remake a unit. Okay, let's see what we got. Ta-da! So there is our unit. Look at the points. Isn't that nice? And the accuracy. So trim all 4 of your units down. Now you can remove the paper now if you want to. I don't, because I like to use this so that I have something to sew by. I can remove the paper afterwards. It's not a problem. But then that way I have a guide when I'm putting these units together. I did want to jump in here and mention too, make sure your fabric is not folded up underneath it, especially when you have pieces that has pretty big pieces on the edges. You want to make sure it's, you know, laid out flat and that you don't accidentally cut through it where you're not supposed to cut, because yeah, that will make a difference. All right, so at this point you can lay your units out. It's just a 4 patch at this point, and we can sew them together. You're just going to lay them over right sides together. Match all of this up. Make sure your fabric is not tucked up underneath it like it shouldn't be. And all these should be the same size because you trimmed them down to the same size. Now you can just stitch right along this line. Do the same thing to your other units. Then put those 2 pieces together and you will have your block. Removing the paper is pretty easy. Just go backwards. So this is the last piece we sewed on. We're going to go 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. The reason is because a lot of times your stitches are crossing, and if you pull the paper on the one that's on top of, you won't rip your stitches out underneath. So a stiletto works really good in this situation to rip your paper. But it should be perforated enough that it comes right off. So that was 5. We're going to go over here to 4. And I just fold it back right on the seam. And then it should just peel right off. And if you don't get it all, don't worry about it. It will wash out. And you will not see it. So then I've got 3 here. And if it's got cross stitches like right here, you can take your stiletto and just come right in here at a corner. And just lift that up, and then it should tear right out. This is probably the only downfall to paper piecing, but for me, the benefits of what you get far outweigh the time it takes to do this. And this is one of those mindless things. You could just take it to the TV and sit and watch TV, peel paper. So I'm taking my stiletto in here, and I'll just run it along that seam. And along this seam. Now I would do this on the whole block after it was finished. I'm just doing a unit here just to show you guys. And it should come off, and you know, you'll get a few little pieces. You could take some tweezers in there. You definitely, when you start peeling your paper, you definitely want to hold down the edge where your stitches when you start, because they will pull up if you're not careful. So just wherever you start, put your thumb and just hold it on all those points. Easy peasy. And there we go. There is our block. Isn't that absolutely gorgeous? Beautiful. Okay. So if you have any questions or something, leave them in the comments. I don't check them very often, but I will try to kind of keep up on this video. If you want to follow us or follow me over in Peggy's Quilting Group on Facebook, that's the name of it, Peggy's Quilting Group. Look that up and answer the questions, and we'll be sure to add you in. And other than that, I will see you guys next month. Have a great day.